I'm Josh Cooperman, and this is the August 2024 installment of the Convo by Design Icon Registry, featuring another absolutely creative individual who appeared on the show. This month's inductee is an amazing talent. It's Jamie Bush. Jamie and I met at his LA offices quite some time ago, 2018, I think. What struck me most about Jamie then, as it does now, is the frame of reference he draws against in his work. Growing up on a dairy farm in upstate New York with family members in the creative arts as well, designers, photographers, Jamie studied architecture in New Orleans, moved out to LA, and founded his design company in 2002. This experience of his has given him opposing viewpoints from which to draw his design concepts. Jamie he's a deep thinker and an extraordinary creative. And he doesn't shy away from giving back. And I love that. And that's what makes Jamie Bush a design icon. I was excited to talk to you. Like I said, I saw most of the panel that you did with Nate at Legends this year. Have you done Legends before?
Yes. I've done Windows for 2 previous years.
You have?
Yeah, and I usually take a year or 2 off in between, just because it's a big time commitment. But I honestly love window design. Well, because coming from New York, and where it's such a tradition of window design was a serious thing, because you have pedestrians and especially holidays. And so, Christmas windows are such a huge thing. And I also going to Bergdorf's and any of these fantastic jewelry shops. I mean, it was seriously a very considered artistic endeavor. And that's not really that considered in LA because it's a car culture. So people don't really slow down and sort of walk. But I thought it was the one opportunity here where you have this vitrine, this limited space where you can create something magical in these confines. And I loved it. I mean, I did 2 different windows, 2 different years. 1 year I did 6 windows, I think it was, because it was circulating around a store. But but it's if you take it seriously, it's a big time commitment, and so I have to parse it out.
I get that, and you have to take that seriously.
Some people don't.
Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
If you want it to be good, you have to take it seriously.
Yeah, whatever you do. I mean, if you bake a cake and you want it to be amazing cake, you put the time and effort into it. And so we always did. And it wasn't so much promoting the business per se. It's more, it's a free-for-all fantasy sort of moment that you could interpret this thing, whatever the theme is, and make something magical and hopefully memorable. And I loved it. I mean, it's something that is a treat for me, but exhausting at the same time.
I can imagine it is, and to do it in such a small space.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, let's be honest. Designers, architects, you're creatives. It's not that you don't want people to see the work. Of course, you want people to see the work, but you want people to see the work under your in your terms. And when you get published, to see the work the way that it's viewed through your eyes with a photographer. What's so interesting, and I love Legends, and I love LCDQ. I love that the district, the quarter, it's walkable. Mm-hmm. I grew up here, so it is a car culture, and you drive everywhere. But to be able to get out of the car, that must have been a little like being at home for you.
Yeah, and it is. My office used to be right on La Cienega, so it was a very neighborhood thing for me as well, where I felt that it was something that I wanted to participate in, but I felt that it was communal. These were all my friends and neighbors that were hosting or participating, and so it felt like a natural extension. But it was also something where, in a perfect world, it sort of questions what a limited space or a window or sort of how people think about things without a client, which is such an interesting thing because in our industry, it's client driven. So really everything that you see, unless you're even at the very tippy top of your game, it's always a service business for somebody that you're performing a certain task for, which sometimes makes things better, but other times gives you a lot of limitations. So it is interesting to see what people do when they're given free rein to a certain extent.
It's true, isn't it? And it's just like a design house or a showcase house. Or backing up a little bit. So you hung your shingle in 2002?
Yes.
About then?
Yeah.
So before that, Marmol Ratziner, Kelly Wersler, you did some time in those studios.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I love about the industry is giving back a little bit. How, not many industries still have that, work under, tutelage under, learn from.
Right.
You get to learn at the feet of. I was listening again back to Legends. I was listening to Bunny Williams talk about working for Parrish Adley and learning the things that she liked and learning the things that she didn't like.
Right.
For you, what was that experience like, and what did you learn that you liked, and how did that experience refine the type of creative that you wanted to be?
Well, originally I was trained as an architect, so I studied and I practiced a little bit in New York and then really came out here. And one of my first jobs was with this architect, Bob Hale, who was running Frank Gehry's office and just left and started his own little practice. And we went to the same university together, so that's how I found him. And I knew nothing. I was absolutely useless. I'm surprised I didn't get fired. I didn't know how to do anything. And that sort of just opened my eyes a little bit to what LA had to offer and how to run a small business and how it was really small. There was like 3 of us. And then I eventually went to Marmol Ratziner, which was an amazing time for me, again, knowing very little. When you come out of school, design school, if it's architecture school or design, you really don't know any practical, or at least I didn't, any practical sort of experience things. I mean, they teach you design, but not to really be an employee. And so at Marmol Ratziner, I was still super green. But I was coming in at the tail end of when they were finishing the Kaufman House, Richard Neutra's house in Palm Springs. They just worked on Raymond Loewy's house, a restoration of that, and so some other, really getting a foothold in becoming these arbiters of mid-century true restoration and really building a huge clientele at that time. And it was a great experience for me. I just felt that it was a bigger firm. They were really sort of crafting their aesthetic at that time, and gave me a window into a design aesthetic that is a language. I really believe that Marmol Ratziner sort of created a language that's it's not necessarily groundbreaking, but very a refined California aesthetic that is recognizable. And that was interesting to me. And all along as I was doing that, I realized that I wasn't necessarily cut out for being a pure architect. I really just didn't have the appetite or the talent or the stomach for it. And I left there with a couple guys from Marmol Ratziner. We started our own firm and building things ourselves and remodeling stuff and doing everything wrong, like not knowing how to run a business and But surviving. Like, we had some projects and we did some things, but I realized in California it's really difficult, super challenging to be an architect with ever-changing codes and energy restrictions, and it's highly technical. And I could have done well if I just stuck it out, maybe, but we were working on a house in the hillside in the Palisades, and we had neighborhood ordinance, we had coastal commission to deal with, we had caissons and these sort of like foundation backfill issues, and there was so much, and it, to me, it took the joy out of the creative process. And I realized at that point, growing up in a family that was really a group of collectors, people that really collected and appreciated sort of objects and design. I realized I was leaning more toward furnishings, and I started to be a picker. I really started to sort of buy and sell mid-century things at flea markets and secondhand stores, and learning about mid-century modern design that was really foreign to me because it wasn't something I grew up with. I grew up in a 1850s Greek revival home with, Chippendale furniture and things like that. And I was just obsessed. And so I started getting into that. And then through my partner at the time, he was teaching piano to students of one of Kelly Wurstler's clients. And I really discovered her through this woman who was her client, and I just was blown away. And so I started doing interior design on my own. I had one project I completed, and I realized I didn't know what I was doing. And so I never forget this. So I went to a birthday party of my friend who was her client, and I wrapped the present in this Chinese chinoiserie wallpaper. I used to buy all this wallpaper, and I'll never forget because Kelly came over and it's like smelled the wallpaper, like the glue on the back. She's like, "Oh my God, is that wallpaper?" And then we started talking and became sort of friendly, and then I don't know. Before I knew it, I was working there, and that was for me completely thrilling. It was when she was working out of this bungalow in LA, just north of Beverly, and it was a magical world. I mean, she was beautiful and fearless and just funny and irreverent, but sweet and with no fear, just putting everything out there. And, some people don't like her design work. Other people covet it. She's in some ways a controversial character because she has a very strong aesthetic. And I've so admired her and her journey and evolution because she doesn't sit on her laurels and do the same thing over and over. I think she's constantly evolving. She'll be working probably until she's dead in the grave. Like, I think she's just an obsessive personality and sort of like has so many ideas. And I think 20 years from now, she may be doing something completely different. And I learned so much about that courageousness and about Los Angeles's appetite for the new and for something other than, and which I don't find always on the East Coast, and I felt that LA was such a fertile ground for a new sense of sort of California modernism that was sort of like springing up at that time, and very fortunately, I was able to sort of make my own way and start my own firm and get some great work, and I just really credit a lot of those early experiences for like helping me on this, journey.
It's really interesting too, and that journey. What I think is interesting, and it happens quite often. As a native Angelino, I've seen this, and I get it, and it happens over and over again. And I think people are surprised, and it's somewhat disrespected. You've been here a while. You've seen how this works. There's such a, call it an ephemeral nature to architecture and design in Southern California in particular, because this is where people came to reinvent themselves.
Mm-hmm.
This is where people of all kinds come to reinvent themselves. And there's just sort of this welcoming attitude where you can come out here and you can try something ridiculous and stupid. And you know what? It may be great.
Yep.
And then you learn something.
Yeah.
Or it may be ridiculous and stupid, in which case people won't laugh at you, they'll laugh with you, and then it goes away, and then you try something else.
I completely agree. I coming from the East Coast, I've always found that there's a more learned, traditional sense of sort of how to make it and the proper channels and facilities. And sometimes you throw something out there, it doesn't do well, you're done. And I feel like you could move to LA and be, running a car dealership. And all of a sudden you start making, side tables, and somebody sees them and doesn't know who you are, but they like it. And then all of a sudden you start selling in a shop like that. There's an unbelievable acceptance here. And I feel that because we're not, it's not this sort of staid attitude of provenance and about being a slave to history and sort of tradition, it sometimes produces horrendous things. The worst, god-awful, monstrosities. But it also allows the freedom for experimentation. So you get inspired things created. And it allows for failure. And I think that's why LA's become so dynamic, because, you screw up, something fails, you're not done. You might have 3 more chapters or 17 more chapters, or you try something else. I completely agree with that, and I feel that, at least for me, it helps me experiment, because I don't have fear that, well, if it doesn't work out, it might, you're not done with, hopefully.
Yeah, no, it's so true. But what's really interesting too is if you go up 300 miles, if you go to San Francisco, attitude is totally different.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
It's not.
You can't do it.
No, it's, it's funny. I love San Francisco. It's a beautiful place. It's, I think, more attuned with a slight East Coast attitude. It's more conservative.
Oh, yeah.
But there's also sometimes a higher taste level because of that. When the thing about education is that it's amazing, but sometimes it's stifling, because the more you know, sometimes you become almost overly educated, and then you get paralysis. You're afraid of doing the wrong thing or not following in the footsteps of the right pathway. And I feel that, not that I'm a proponent of lack of education, but I think that unless you just throw yourself in the pot and start doing something, sometimes it's too stifling. Too much education sometimes is not a good thing. You have to make things. I believe you have to be in the weeds and trying to do stuff, and things don't work, and then you try something else.
I was just going to jump onto that and just say that, out of panic comes opportunity. Mm-hmm. When, like you said, when you're in the weeds and you're panicked to try to figure out how to do something, is sometimes when that aha moment comes. I was just going to ask you though, from that, success can be stifling as well.
Yeah.
If you achieve success, if you become really, really well known and popular in any creative endeavor, In music, it's always the second album, right?
But yeah, you might it might be a flop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In design, here in Southern California too, trying new things and doing something stupid for stupid's sake, or trying something that's never been done simply because you want to see what'll happen or what people will think of it. Turning a motel on Sunset into an art installation that's completely painted white. Interesting. I live out in the South Bay, and in Manhattan Beach, someone had the emoji house where it was pink with a couple of smiley face emojis painted on it. Incredibly stupid. Made the neighborhood go nuts.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I'm sure.
got attention.
Yeah, it does. I know. We're working on a project right now that really energetic, super fun clients that are pushing us almost beyond a comfort zone of in a creative way. The house is in some ways going to be way over the top. And I honestly don't know if it's going to fail. It may be horrendous. We don't know. And it's unsettling and it's thrilling and it's forcing us to get out of our comfort zone because we're doing something that we haven't done before in big ways, big, bold, sort of graphic, colorful ways. And it may not be good. It really might. And we're all in it together. And I don't know. It's something where I'm very grateful for it because it keeps me interested in this industry rather than I don't want to make widgets and just do the same thing over and over again. To me, that's not interesting personally, for what I want to make and create. I always want to sort of try new things, and not that I won't ever repeat something or there's not something that works that really, it is that balance of making sure it's comfortable and sort of visually proportionate and at the end of the day, if it's a residence, livable for those clients. But at the same time, I do find Los Angeles in particular incredibly forgiving for experimentation.
And I'm just curious too. So New York is home. If I've got this correct, family, we've got dairy farmers.
Yes,
we've got creatives of different types.
Yeah.
But we've got a solid, deep foundational base on the East Coast in New York.
Yes.
So what brings you out here? I say that because you love windows. We talked about that. You love
Right.
you love the style. You love what that means. You love getting out of your car and walking and looking and being able to see design. And I can tell being immersed in it, right, being around it.
Yeah.
As opposed to here in LA where, and I hate to put it this way, but sometimes it's kind of like being at the wild animal park. You're in the car and you're driving by, looking at everything.
Right.
It's not real. You're just driving through it.
Right.
But why the move? What made the change?
There were two reasons. One, my education was in modernist architecture, and that was what I was schooled in. That's what my interest lays in, and in the States at the time, I graduated in '94, and New York didn't really have much going on as far as residential modernist architecture. It's much more of a traditional city, and you either are doing skyscrapers or the interior of an apartment. Where LA really had, at the time for me, this sort of this incredible deep well of historical mid-century architecture, but also a whole school of modernist architects building things, and that excited me. So I had a friend out here who was an artist. she was living here, and so I had one friend, and I just figured I'd be here for a year or two and try it out. And the other half of that is that, I'm a really I'm sort of a farm boy. I grew up at the beach. I never wore shoes. Working in Manhattan felt stifling to me. I worked in Manhattan for a little bit, but also I love the freedom that LA provided for sort of a more casual existence. And I had a chip on my shoulder where I had family that could help me in business with connections and help me along my way, and I wanted no help because I always felt like I had to prove to myself that I could make it on my own without help, and if I got help, I wouldn't really know if I had the chops to do it on my own.
Isn't that an interesting feeling? That is funny, isn't it? Making it on one's own in the scariest way possible. Or failing catastrophically.
I didn't view it so much in the way that I might fail catastrophically because I was a kid. So, but I honestly felt that I don't know, I was gay and I needed to like sort of have my own experience and sort of be on my own and figure things out sort of not under my family's eye. And not that they were so oppressive and watchful. It was more, your own neuroses and sort of, but also just wanting to experiment, when you're young is the time to do it. And just all my friends were artists and architects and living in Silver Lake, and everybody lived in these great old places, and it was cheap and fun and easy. LA was, 25 years ago, LA was really sort of not so popular and inexpensive and super playful, and I had a great time. I mean, and it really shaped me to stay here,
And someone who loves mid-century, someone who loves modernism, someone who loves that modern aesthetic, in Silver Lake, I love it. A couple of years ago, I went and toured the Neutra VDL house, and you're in there and you're looking at this indoor-outdoor philosophy with water to bounce off to the reservoir, to sort of be on this ship-like motif in its design, and you're looking at Silvertop, and it's the whole thing. It's almost like an amusement park. It felt like a while back. It's not really the same, but you get the vibe.
Yeah, and at the time when I was living there, I didn't know anything. I studied a little bit of these guys in school, but I had friends that rented Neutra houses or had lived in Schindler apartments, and for no money. It wasn't that popular. They were just architects and artists. They weren't collectors or people with any money. So I got to really know them through the eyes of my peers rather than a textbook or in magazines per se. So that was really a window of like discovery for me, which was thrilling, and it just felt right to me, and again, I think everybody's experience is different, but it had a very profound experience on me where, we've done a lot of mid-century sort of homes and that aesthetic, but that aesthetic of mid-century design to me was always about a sense of optimism. There's a playfulness, there's a serious playfulness about it, and not just in the States, but sort of, in Europe and sort of, but I really feel like post-war design was sort of a breath of fresh air because people could sort of breathe again, and the war was over. Manufacturing started up, in a major way, and people were riffing on these sort of new technologies. I mean, it was a very exciting time, but I really believe that sense, that positivity in the design work itself and the playfulness had such a impact on my work, because it could still be taken seriously, but there was a joy about it, and a surprise, and really being like these adults that are channeling their inner child and working with color and form and silhouette and in really a magical way. And that's something that's, everybody sort of might categorize mid-century design in sort of like a cliched sort of envelope, of this sort of like something that's pastiche. But really, when you boil it down, I think those core sort of design philosophy and elements of where that all came from is incredibly profound. And I think so many contemporary designers are still channeling that energy and those forms now.
Do you feel like the playfulness is gone, though?
In design?
In modern in particular. Mid-century, in modern in particular. I understand what you're saying, that serious but playful feels like, and this has happened really, I've kind of seen it, if you go out to Modernism Week, which I'm sure, it's not as kitschy playful as it was not so long ago. And modernism in general, the way that it's viewed now it's popular. Now it's a thing. Now it's well respected, and it's perfect. Before it was still experimental, but now it's very much popular again, and it's part of the landscape in a serious and meaningful way. Has it lost its playfulness, or can you still have fun with it?
I think you can. I mean, I think it's hard to generalize with these things because everybody.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Like in the 80s. Mediterranean here in Southern California. I know, it's funny, right?
No, but it was a thing.
It was a thing.
Yeah.
With the big corbels and
yeah.
peach.
Right.
Yeah. Very SoCal version of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But it was playful, then it was silly, then it got ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Then it was like, okay, got it. What's next?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that happening right now, but do you see that as kind of like the process, as the way architecture in particular is viewed?
It's a hard question. I think when anything gets popular, it gets bastardized in some form. It's inevitable because everybody jumps on the bandwagon and riffs on it or makes reproductions or commodifies it somehow, And so there's definitely that aspect of it. But I guess I find that there are designers who I look at that are still making very playful things that aren't reproductions or copies, but like Pierre Yanovich, the French interior designers, does super playful furniture. There's people like the architect Barbara Bester, who, almost builds these sort of monopoly sort of piece, like very elemental structures with like a big yellow door or like these broad gestural strokes that are whimsical, but new and interesting proportions and sort of creating shapes, but definitely referential to, the people that she looked to, and studied from. And so I guess I don't get bogged down with there's so much stuff out there. There's so much design all over the world. And but I do still find that people that I admire and respect, a lot of them really do come from that, do have a sense of play in their work.
It's funny, I had a conversation recently. One of my favorite places is Marfa, Texas.
Yeah.
And, what Donald Judd did with a community, nothing short of amazing. And, when you think of it, everyone will talk about the Prada Marfa art installation. Or, you could talk about the exteriors from Giant and the El Paradiso, and all of those things are there. It's amazing. What's also there is just this weird combination of here's an old Adobe, an old original Adobe with a completely harsh modern angled building attached to it, which just it looks like somebody took two hands and two buildings that were separated by a mile each and just smashed them together. And it's like, wow, that shouldn't be that way, but it's really cool.
Right.
And I feel like, that's the feeling that just gets people so excited. It gets me excited about architecture. I love that. Architecture and design. That being said, what motivates you? What keeps you excited to keep trying different things and keep trying new things? That spark to keep moving in a direction regardless of what that direction is.
I don't know. There's so many things. I mean, I think I tend to be a reactionary person. So, more and more as I get older, I get more opportunities, which is amazing. And I've realized like time is limited, for the amount of energy that you could put into things. So it's not a very strategic game plan, but I find that like I try to veer myself in the office to things that allow us to do things that we haven't necessarily done before. So just recently we got invited to design a chair for a charity auction. I've never designed a chair. And there was a deadline. It was for a good cause. Did I really want to do it? No. And it scared the shit out of me because I'm just like, this might look terrible. And we designed it and we got things donated, fabric and the fabrication of it, but we did mock-ups and we put time into it. And it's not so much for the it's a small little local charity, but it forced us to do something that we never did before as an office. People in the office helped me. We sort of designed it together, and it turned out amazing because we created something that we never did before. And so things like that get me really excited, that I feel that I wouldn't have done that if we didn't get that call. And so rather than being like, oh, I'm going to come up with a furniture collection, it's more like this falls on the desk and it sort of channels us to do those things. It's not the best business model, I'm not the best businessman, but I like that happenstance because it's less calculated and it's a little more free flowing. And I don't know. I guess I've had some success. We're still open and we have work going on, so something's working.
Something is working. And you know what else is working is your office. It's fun. I love doing this. I love being able to record at people's offices instead of at the studio where everything is.
It's a shit show here all the time. If you can all see this, it's like a mad mess everywhere.
Well, I love it too because in addition to everything that's going on, you've got pieces everywhere. You've got the libraries, you've got the swatches and the samples, and you've also got, you mentioned earlier that you become kind of like collector, tinkerer, and there's pieces in different states of very disarray.
Yes.
And it tells me that you're not just working in one cohesive workflow, but that there's all kinds of things actually going on. And I'm wondering if that keeps you interested all the time. Is that what does it?
Yeah, I think so. If
it was easy, you wouldn't be doing this anymore. I get that feeling.
I don't know.
You'd find something more complicated to do.
Probably. I know we do complicate things. I've been lucky enough to have this extended family that, and I call this home. Everybody that works here is like a family member, and I've been really lucky to be surrounded by great people, and I spend more time here than I do at home, so it really becomes the home, and it's when you're able to play and experiment and sort of like make things or put things together in new ways, and it's all about discovery and sort of surprises, and there is like an organized chaos here, which I thrive on, because it forces us to, I believe, make the purest decisions. Where like when you have to go with your gut on a lot of things and you don't have too much time to ruminate, or if you do ruminate over and they keep coming back, then you have to like start over and throw something out and redo things, even if you lose money on it. To me, it's a very sort of organic, like honest representation of the work, because it's we don't have the ability to dwell over things too much, because we have a lot going on. So it for me, the way I like to operate is that it forces. It's exhausting, but it forces the right decision making, if that makes sense. Everybody has different styles, and in some ways I would love to have 1 or 2 jobs a year, but I don't know, they might not turn out as well. You might have too much time to think about stuff.
Isn't that amazing? Too much time to think about it might actually complicate it and make it
worse.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting too. I love that philosophy. Bunny Williams said that when working for Parrish Hadley, that Sister Parrish thrived and loved chaos and conflict. And that's how she learned that that's not what she wanted in her own office. And sometimes you have to learn from that.
Yeah, totally.
And that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're in a position where you're giving back, and you've got young people working around the office who, for the most part, you can pretty much rely on the fact that some, if not all, who knows, will go out and eventually start their own.
Yeah. And they'll be like, oh my God, that office was a mess, and that's not going to be my office, and we're going to have all this structure, and no, but it's true. Like it's so, I always wish I worked for some big, like a Gruen or, some enormous sort of firm to see how the structure of these things work, even though it sounds like a nightmare to me, but just to get that experience, because I always work for smaller firms that had organization but also winged it, and I don't know. I mean, luckily I now am at a point business-wise where it's super professional, and we have like all of the facilities and backup to sort of make it run properly, but it's weird. Art and commerce don't necessarily always align, and it's a tricky dance between the two all the time.
It is. It's interesting too. I read somewhere that when you go home to New York, you spend time living on a boat.
Yes.
So interesting.
It's a houseboat, but it's a boat.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's a craft.
And what's my point? What size is it?
It's actually bigger than where I live now. It's 3 stories.
Okay, wait a minute. This is completely blowing the whole image.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
It's I think it's like 1,400 square feet, but it's
dear God, it's a boat.
It's a barge actually.
Okay, all right.
But it's a total fluke. It's like my favorite place on earth, to be honest. It's like this dreamy, floating house in this beautiful harbor overlooking wetlands, and it rocks slightly, and it's like this sort of wooden beach house surrounded by wildlife, and really in tune with nature, with wind and storms and swans and seals and crabs, and it's a very visceral place, and the light's incredible. It's really it's this magical little place that I was able to fortunately buy for like nothing and remodel and sort of make this magical escape to, and I might one day live there full time or something. It's just crazy.
With the remodeling, did you get to you made it something exactly what you wanted?
Yes.
It's exactly your aesthetic. It's the place where you want to live.
Yeah, but it's not done. It's never going to be done. But we're constantly working on it and doing things to it. But it's very personal because it's where I grew up, and like my dad milled the wood for the countertops. It's like a beautiful place.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that kind of hits the point. And the point is, it's very easy to talk about aesthetic, and it's very easy to talk about style and design. At the end of the day, design is experiential. It's personal.
Yeah.
It's about where you live and about what's there and about whose heart and hand had a play in it.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's what makes, whether it's finished or not.
No, I know it's never going to be done.
And that's funny too. You say that with some confidence that it's never going to be done.
Yeah, because it shouldn't. The weird thing about this industry is that everybody's drawn to these sort of picture perfect vignettes that are completely in balance and harmony, and I think I'm always the cobbler with no shoes, because like for years my mattress was on the floor and I'd like broken leveler blinds in the window, and like that doesn't matter to me. The things that give me pleasure personally in my own home are things that have a story about them, that an old friend who passed away and I have their sparkly alligator in the corner, or somebody that made me something that was a present for a certain time, or a painting my grandmother made, or things like that are still, if they're ugly, I'm not going to have them, but if they're but that there's a story and a history and sort of a marking of time. And in the houseboat, because it's where I grew up, the contractor I went to high school with, and he used to live on a houseboat. And so he would drive up his boat in the middle of winter and like working on the side of it. And the guy who installed the fireplace he parasails. I see him like flying his parasail outside the houseboat. And then the people that planted the trees is my neighbor at my parents' beach house. And like, it's a very personal thing to me. At the same time, very beautiful and peaceful. It's just, to me, that's the perfect combination, because it is beautiful, but there's history and people that are meaningful to me behind the whole endeavor.
I just love that. I do, and I love the story because, you mentioned about design, and I feel like social media has ruined design in some small way, because everything does have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Everything, there's nothing out of sorts. Everything's in its place, and a place for everything, and everything perfect. There's never any dust, and there's never anything left out. It's like, that's not real.
Yeah. Well, it's sound bites, and I think we have such an appetite for the next most beautiful thing. And I will say, it's always a balance. I find things on social media that are completely inspiring, that I never would have known about, or makers. Like, I've met a lot of craftspeople on social media that I would have never known, who now I work with. So that it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I think you find both. But it is true, because like if there's a lot of meaning behind something, but it's not the most beautiful image, or if something is not the most color corrected, like perfected imagery, it might not get much attention. But you also, I think, with social media or Instagram and all that stuff, I think the most important thing is to do it for yourself and to put out there in the world what you like and what's important to you. And eventually the right people will sort of, appreciate that, because the end game, I think, with all of that stuff is about storytelling and sort of putting out there in the world like your personal aesthetic and interests. And it's not about how well responded it is, It's like, it's about the totality of sort of what your vision is.
So I'm like way over the amount of time I told you I was going to do this. So I just want you to know that I greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, sure.
At some point, I do.
I'm quitting. I'm quitting.
I do. No, I do I do micro case studies on certain projects that I think are really interesting. So at some point, I would really love to circle back with you. And do something just on the houseboat.
Oh yeah,
because it sounds amazing, and I'd love to know about the floors, and I'd love to know about your dad, and I'd love to know about the guy down the street who did the landscape. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So given an opportunity, I'd love to circle back with you.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't, with all of these things, I and it's sort of how I approach design in some ways, where like I wasn't looking for a houseboat. It's just sort of like came up. And I think the best things in life a lot of times are those happy mistakes or, opportunities that are sort of like staring at you in the face that are improbable or nonsensical in a way. This thing doesn't make any sense, and thank God, because otherwise it wouldn't be as special as it is.
That's the greatest. And the last thing I will say is I find it amazing because you have obviously an emotional connection to a property, and I can't think of anyone better to have an emotional connection to a property than someone who is a architect, designer, who is working with clients to create that same type of connection for them.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I know you've seen it, is sometimes people are just connected by the business. And it's a project, we work on the project, we're finished with the project, we move on to the next project. And not everyone can really feel that emotional connection. And I feel like when you can, that's where, heart and hand, that's where the difference is.
Yeah, I know. And it as a business model, it's difficult because all this requires time. So, I find the most interesting places, that we get to visit or occupy. Sometimes it's generations of people living in a spot, or, this like 17th century grotto that like then became a restaurant, or, that time, not to say something new and fresh can't be meaningful, but I think that it's the people that you encounter and those experiences that sort of give meaning to things. So, and I think all that stuff, it does. It just takes time to make it, to have a story and to make it special. And that's something that you really can't buy.
It's true. And this was really special for me, and I appreciate your time.
Sure.
Thanks, Jamie.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie, for taking the time and the willingness to share your story. Congratulations on your addition to the Convo by Design Icon Registry. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. Thank you to my partner sponsors, Design Hardware, Thermosol, TimberTech, Pacific Sales, and Monogram. These are amazing companies and amazing partners all. They support the trade, and I love sharing these amazing resources with you. Thanks again for listening. Until next week, be well, and take today first.